We interviewed Sergeant Clayton Zimmerman and Captain Franklin Zimmerman. Sergeant Zimmerman served from June 1972 to June 1991 during the Vietnam War in Camp Pointer in Seoul, Korea. He also had training in Fort Dix, New Jersey, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, Fort Lewis, Washington, and Fort Indiantown Gap, Pennsylvania. Captain Zimmerman was a doctor who served from 1944 to 1945 during World War II. He served with the 10th Mountain Medical Battalion in India, Burma, and China.
Captain Franklin Zimmerman served in the Army as a doctor during World War II. Sergeant Clayton Zimmerman served in a communications company during the Vietnam War. Captain Franklin Zimmerman was born on January 1, 1917 in Schaefferstown, Pennsylvania. After going to medical school, he was drafted into the military. He had some training in Colorado for mountain climbing and mountain excavation. Eventually he was shipped by boat to India, which took 61 painstakingly long days. Mentally and physically exhausted, he traveled to North India or Bangladesh by train. Once he arrived there, he went to Burma by truck. He became a medical officer and worked on war injuries from shrapnel or gunshots. He belonged to a battalion of 12 men who took care of the Chinese soldiers. Captain Zimmerman was one of 2 captains in the group. They would travel in the jungles from one battalion to another battalion. Then they would take care of the men who had been injured from that battle. His battalion would also come across some of the natives who had built their tribes there. They didn't speak English but were very welcoming of the men. Then Captain Zimmerman and his battalion traveled to China by foot. They took a pack of mules with them who carried all of their belongings. He really enjoyed this trip because the war was winding down and they were just transporting the animals. One day he received a notice that he could go home if he wanted to. So Captain Zimmerman packed up his belongings and was able to catch a plane that afternoon. He flew from India to China over the Himalayas. Then he flew to the western part of India to Karachi, and he rested there. Later he flew from there to Abada in Iran, then to Cairo, Egypt, Cairo to Libya, Libya to French Morocco to home. Captain Zimmerman is very proud of his services to his country. However, he believes that there is no glory to war. Has this experience changed you?
Why did it change me? That's a tough question. That's a really tough question. I don't know if it really changed me. The horrors of war, if you think of it that way, you'll never forget. You never talk about the horrors of the war. You talk about the good things, like being in camp and not doing anything at all, or going on a trip someplace, or looking around, or being on the boat. These were nice things you could enjoy in a certain aspect, but the other part you don't.
Sergeant Clayton Zimmerman was born on November 20th, 1948 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He went to Eastern Lebanon County High School and then went to college. When he graduated college, his draft notice was at home waiting for him. He was not very happy about this because he was married to his wife, Lori, at the time. Sergeant Zimmerman was trained for almost 1 year to work on the electronic equipment for the communications. He started out at Fort Dix, New Jersey for basic training for about 10 weeks. Then he spent almost a year in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey for electronics communication training. He graduated second in his class, earning him an extra stripe and promoted him. This meant that he received a bit more money and that he didn't have to go to Vietnam because they sent the top 4 graduates to Seoul, Korea. So then he was shipped directly overseas to Korea to work in a communications company with 5 officers and 5 enlisted men. Sergeant Zimmerman lived in a Quonset hut, a building made out of corrugated aluminum. It was right next to company headquarters, which is where his office was located. His company took care of the communications for all the troops along the border at the DMZ, or Demilitarized Zone. When his commanding officer looked at his file, he noticed that he had been to college. Then the officer called him into his office and asked him if he could learn how to type. So Sergeant Zimmerman stayed in the commanding officer's office for a year, and he never got to work on the equipment he was trained for. Even so, he received some commendation medals for his hard work. When he had been overseas for about 2 months, he received a phone call from the Red Cross in San Francisco saying that his son, Alan, had been born. The only way he was able to communicate with his wife and her newborn son was through little cassette tapes that they sent him, numerous letters, and occasionally he was able to make a phone call. Eventually, Sergeant Zimmerman was able to return home. He was very excited because he was going to see his 10-month-old son for the first time. He boarded the plane in Seoul, Korea, and headed to Tokyo. Once he got there, he flew to Oakland, California, where he was processed out of the Army. Then he caught a plane to Cincinnati, Ohio, where his family was going to meet him. After 3 days of exhausting travel, the plane finally landed on the tarmac runway.
When I got to Cincinnati, Lori met me at the plane, and the plane landed out on the runway, the tarmac, and she was allowed to come running out to the plane, and I came down off the plane when she met me, and she had Alan, and it was a pretty emotional moment. It really was. And she said to you, "Snap, here's your son, Alan." And she handed Alan to me, who was 10 months old, and I held him for the first time, and he promptly threw up all over me. So I never forgot it. It was a wonderful time. Yeah, I mean, at the time I didn't want to be in the service. I really didn't want to be there. But in retrospect, I think there was a lot of good to it. And I've also come to the belief that I think maybe all younger people should serve their country in one way or the other, whether it's military or volunteer services, whether it's before you go to college or after you go to college. And I didn't believe that before that, and I do believe it now. Yeah. I think it's beneficial not only for the country, but I think it's beneficial for all of us, you guys included. Yeah. It did change.